Which U.S. states are falling apart the fastest? It's no secret that America is facing a growing crisis. Poverty is skyrocketing, homelessness is out of control, and entire communities are struggling to survive. But which states are feeling the heat the most? From shocking eviction rates to tent cities growing overnight, some places are collapsing faster than we ever imagined. How bad is it? Which state has the most homeless people? And why are some places drowning in poverty while others thrive? Let's dive into the top 10 states collapsing fastest in America. Number 10. Florida. Florida. The land of endless beaches, sunshine, and Disney magic. But beneath the palm trees and theme parks, there's a hidden crisis brewing. While Florida may seem like a paradise for tourists, for over 31,362 people, it's a place where they have no home. Florida ranks third in the nation for homelessness, and the numbers are steadily rising. One of the biggest culprits? Skyrocketing housing costs. Rent prices in Miami jumped over 30% in just 1 year, making it one of the least affordable places in the U.S. Imagine working full-time and still not being able to afford rent. That's the reality for many Floridians. And let's talk about wages. While the cost of living keeps going up, wages are moving at snail speed. The state's minimum wage is $12 per hour. But you'd need $28 per hour just to afford a basic one-bedroom apartment in most Florida cities. It's no wonder families, veterans, and even full-time workers are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. The lack of affordable housing is so bad that many people live in their cars, and some even camp out in state parks. You'd think with Florida being home to some of the richest zip codes in America, like Palm Beach and Naples, things would be better. But the wealth gap here is insane. On one end, you have billionaires buying $50 million mansions, and on the other, people sleeping under bridges. Even more concerning, natural disasters like Hurricane Ian in 2022 displaced tens of thousands of residents, many of whom never recovered financially. And guess what? Florida doesn't have enough shelters. For every 10 homeless individuals, only 4 beds are available in shelters. That means thousands are left out in the streets with nowhere to go. And don't even get me started on homelessness among seniors. Florida has the highest percentage of elderly homeless in the U.S. With rising healthcare costs, many older residents lose their homes after just one medical emergency. It's heartbreaking. While there are efforts to tackle this crisis, without drastic action, Florida's paradise might become an even bigger nightmare for thousands. Number 9. Kentucky. When you think of Kentucky, you might picture rolling hills, horse races, and finger-licking good fried chicken. But behind the southern charm, the state is battling a serious crisis. Over 700,000 people in Kentucky live in poverty. That's 1 in 6 residents. And it's not just rural areas suffering. Even cities like Louisville and Lexington are seeing homelessness skyrocket. Kentucky has one of the lowest median household incomes in the U.S. at just $55,454 per year. Compare that to the national median of $74,580, and you see why so many families are struggling to make ends meet. Wages are low, and the job market? Well, let's just say it's not keeping up with modern demands. While tech and finance boom elsewhere, Kentucky still relies heavily on coal, manufacturing, and agriculture, industries that haven't exactly been thriving. And housing? It's becoming a major problem. The average rent in Kentucky jumped by 18% in the last 2 years, and affordable housing is disappearing fast. There are currently only 44 affordable rental homes for every 100 low-income renters. That means more people are being forced into shelters, motels, or even tents. A growing crisis in Kentucky is homelessness among veterans. The state is home to over 300,000 veterans, and shockingly, about 2,000 are homeless. Many struggle with mental health issues, PTSD, and lack of support, making it nearly impossible to find stable housing. Even children are suffering. Over 21% of Kentucky's children live in poverty, one of the highest rates in the nation. Many rely on school meals just to get through the day. Some even sleep in cars with their families because shelters are either full or too far away. While Kentucky has made some progress with new programs aiming to provide affordable housing, the crisis is still growing. The sad truth? Without serious intervention, thousands of people will continue to fall through the cracks. Number 8. West Virginia. West Virginia is known for its breathtaking mountains, coal mines, and rich Appalachian culture. But behind the scenic landscapes, the state is struggling with extreme poverty and homelessness. With a poverty rate of 17.1%, West Virginia has one of the highest poverty rates in the country. Many residents here struggle to afford even the basics, and homelessness is a growing crisis. One of the biggest issues? Job loss. Coal mining was once the backbone of West Virginia's economy, but with the decline of the coal industry, thousands of workers were left unemployed. The average household income here is just $51,248, far below the national median of $74,580. Many residents are working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, but even that isn't enough. And then there's the opioid epidemic, which has devastated communities. West Virginia has the highest overdose rate in the U.S., with over 81.4 drug-related deaths per 100,000 people. Many people battling addiction end up homeless because treatment centers are too expensive or unavailable. In places like Huntington and Charleston, entire tent cities have popped up, filled with people who have nowhere else to go. Affordable housing? Practically non-existent. For every 100 low-income renters, there are only 57 affordable homes available. This shortage forces many people into unsafe, overcrowded housing or onto the streets. Families, veterans, and even elderly residents are struggling to find stable places to live. While there are nonprofits and government programs trying to help, the state lacks the funding to tackle this crisis head-on. Without major investment in housing and job opportunities, West Virginia's poverty and homelessness problems will only get worse. Number 7. New Mexico. New Mexico is famous for its stunning deserts, vibrant culture, and historic pueblos. But there's another side to this state that's far from enchanting. With a poverty rate of 18%, New Mexico ranks as one of the poorest states in America. And the homelessness crisis? It's exploding, rising by over 50% from 2023 to 2024 alone. One major issue is the lack of well-paying jobs. New Mexico has an unemployment rate of 5.1%, one of the highest in the U.S. The average household income is just $54,020, and many residents are stuck in low-wage jobs with no room for growth. In cities like Albuquerque and Santa Fe, rent prices have soared by over 20%, making it nearly impossible for low-income families to find affordable housing. The Navajo Nation and other indigenous communities face even higher poverty rates, with nearly 30% living below the poverty line. Many lack access to running water, electricity, and stable housing. Some Native American families are forced to live in overcrowded homes with multiple generations under one roof because there are simply no affordable options available. Shelters in New Mexico are completely overwhelmed. There are only about 3,000 shelter beds statewide, but over 5,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night. That means thousands are sleeping on the streets, in their cars, or in the desert, where extreme heat and cold make conditions even more dangerous. The state is working to build more affordable housing, but progress is slow. Unless New Mexico creates more jobs, raises wages, and expands housing assistance, thousands more will continue to fall into homelessness. Number 6. Mississippi. Mississippi is rich in history, culture, and Southern hospitality, but when it comes to poverty and homelessness, the state is in serious trouble. With a poverty rate of 19.7%, Mississippi has the highest percentage of people living in poverty in the entire U.S. And the situation isn't improving, it's getting worse. The average household income in Mississippi is only $48,716, nearly $26,000 below the national median. Jobs? Hard to find and even harder to keep. The state relies on agriculture, manufacturing, and low-wage service jobs, which don't pay enough to keep families afloat. Nearly 40% of residents live paycheck to paycheck, with many struggling to afford rent, food, and health care. The housing crisis is hitting Mississippi hard. The state lacks affordable housing, and rent has spiked by nearly 15% in the last 2 years. That might not seem like a lot, but when you're making minimum wage, $7.25 per hour, it's impossible to afford even the cheapest apartments. For every 100 low-income families, there are only 47 affordable rental units available. Homelessness is rising fast, especially in cities like Jackson and Gulfport. Shelters are at full capacity, and the state has few resources to help people transition out of homelessness. Veterans, single mothers, and even college students are among those struggling to find stable housing. One of Mississippi's biggest problems? Healthcare costs. The state has one of the highest uninsured rates in the country, and a single medical emergency can push a family into homelessness overnight. Many elderly residents who live on fixed incomes are being forced out of their homes because they can't afford rent and medication at the same time. Mississippi desperately needs investment in education, jobs, and housing. Without serious changes, the cycle of poverty and homelessness will only deepen, leaving thousands more struggling to survive. Number 5. Louisiana. Louisiana, the land of jazz, Mardi Gras, and amazing Creole cuisine, is also one of the poorest states in America. While tourists flock to New Orleans for the music and food, thousands of locals are struggling just to survive. The state has a poverty rate of 18.65%, making it one of the worst in the nation. And homelessness? It's on the rise, especially after recent natural disasters that left many without homes. One of Louisiana's biggest problems is its low wages. The state's minimum wage is stuck at $7.25 per hour, the federal minimum, and it hasn't increased in over a decade. Meanwhile, the cost of living is creeping up, making it nearly impossible for low-income families to afford housing. The average rent in New Orleans has jumped 25% in just 5 years, leaving many people priced out of their own city. Another factor worsening Louisiana's crisis? Hurricanes and flooding. In 2021, Hurricane Ida destroyed over 800,000 homes and businesses, leaving thousands displaced. Many of these families never fully recovered, and with FEMA aid running out, some were forced into homeless shelters, cars, or even tents. Louisiana gets hit by more hurricanes than almost any other state, meaning homelessness spikes every time a major storm hits. On top of that, Louisiana has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. Many formerly incarcerated individuals struggle to find jobs and housing, increasing the number of homeless men on the streets. And let's not forget about homeless youth. Over 5,000 children in the state are without stable housing. With limited government support and shelters that are already full, Louisiana is facing an uphill battle. Without serious investment in affordable housing and disaster recovery, the state's poverty and homelessness crisis will only get worse. Number 4. Washington. Washington state is home to Amazon, Microsoft, and Starbucks, making it one of the wealthiest states in America. But here's the shocking truth. Over 31,554 people are experiencing homelessness, and the number is growing fast. In just 1 year, homelessness jumped by 12.5%, and nearly half of all homeless individuals in Washington are chronically homeless, meaning they've been without a home for more than a year. The biggest culprit? Insane housing costs. Seattle, the state's largest city, has seen rent prices skyrocket by 45% in the last decade. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is now over $2,300 per month. Meanwhile, the state's minimum wage, at $16.28 per hour, isn't enough to keep up with the rising costs. Even full-time workers can't afford to live where they work, pushing many onto the streets. And while Washington has a booming tech industry, those high-paying jobs aren't accessible to the average person. Many Washingtonians work in retail, food service, or warehouse jobs, where wages haven't kept up with inflation. The result? A growing wealth gap, where the rich get richer and the poor struggle just to survive. Homeless encampments are popping up everywhere, under bridges, in city parks, even in front of luxury apartment buildings. And the state doesn't have enough shelters to house everyone. In fact, for every 10 homeless individuals, only 3 beds are available. The crisis is so severe that Seattle declared a state of emergency on homelessness back in 2015, and the problem has only gotten worse since then. Even in smaller cities like Spokane and Tacoma, the crisis is spreading. Mental health services are overwhelmed, and drug addiction, particularly fentanyl abuse, is making the situation even more dire. Without drastic intervention, Washington's homelessness crisis will continue to spiral out of control. Number 3. Oregon. Oregon is known for its breathtaking landscapes, hipster culture, and craft beer, but also for its massive homelessness crisis. The state has one of the highest rates of homelessness per capita in the U.S., with over 20,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night. And here's the worst part. The majority of them are unsheltered. That means thousands of people are sleeping on sidewalks, in tents, or in cars because there simply aren't enough shelters to accommodate them. One of the biggest reasons for this crisis? Outrageous housing costs. Rent in Portland has jumped by over 30% in the last 5 years, and the median home price is now over $525,000, far out of reach for the average worker. Even people with full-time jobs are struggling to afford rent, especially since Oregon's minimum wage is only $14.20 per hour in most areas. That's nowhere near enough to afford even a studio apartment in Portland, where the average rent is $1,700 per month. Another major issue is drug addiction and mental health struggles. Oregon has the highest rate of drug addiction in the U.S., and sadly, many people don't have access to treatment. Nearly 40% of Oregon's homeless population struggles with mental health disorders, but the state doesn't have enough mental health facilities to help them. This means many people end up on the streets, caught in a cycle that's nearly impossible to escape. Encampments have become so common in Portland that the city passed a law banning public camping. But without affordable housing, where are people supposed to go? Shelters are full, and the state has one of the lowest shelter bed-to-homeless ratios in the country. Oregon needs a massive investment in affordable housing, mental health care, and addiction treatment, because right now, the situation is only getting worse. If drastic changes aren't made soon, Oregon's homelessness crisis will continue to spiral out of control. Number 2. New York. New York, the land of skyscrapers, Broadway, Wall Street, and a massive homelessness crisis? That's right. While New York is home to some of the richest people on the planet, it's also home to 158,019 homeless individuals, the second highest number in the U.S. And the worst part? The crisis is only growing. Let's start with housing costs. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in New York City is now $4,300 per month. Yes, you hear that right. Even if you make a solid $100,000 per year, that's still half your income gone, just on rent. But for those earning minimum wage, $16 per hour, affording rent is a total fantasy. The math just doesn't add up, which is why thousands of people are being pushed onto the streets. New York's homeless crisis isn't just limited to NYC. Cities like Buffalo, Rochester, and Albany are also seeing rising homelessness rates, especially among low-income families and seniors. In fact, nearly one-third of New York's homeless population is made up of children, a heartbreaking statistic. And let's not forget the mental health crisis. Over 40% of New York's homeless individuals suffer from mental illness or substance abuse disorders. But the state doesn't have enough mental health facilities, so many end up cycling between the streets, jails, and emergency rooms. New York does have more shelters than most states, but even that isn't enough. The city's shelter system is beyond overwhelmed, with record-high numbers of people seeking beds every night. The government has spent billions trying to fix the problem, but without affordable housing solutions, the cycle continues. From luxury penthouses in Manhattan, selling for $50 million to tent encampments in subways and parks, the wealth gap in New York is staggering. Unless drastic action is taken to lower rent prices and expand mental health services, New York's homelessness crisis will only get worse. Number 1. California. Welcome to California, the Golden State, where dreams come true. Or for 187,084 people, where dreams are completely shattered. That's right. California has the worst homelessness crisis in the United States, with nearly 1 in 4 homeless Americans living here. The biggest reason? Insane housing costs. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles is over $2,800 per month, while in San Francisco, it's a jaw-dropping $3,700. Even tech workers struggle to afford rent, So imagine how impossible it is for minimum wage workers. You'd need to earn at least $50 per hour to comfortably afford a basic apartment in cities like San Diego or San Jose. Another major problem? The cost of living. Groceries, gas, healthcare, everything is more expensive in California. And for those who lose their jobs, get sick, or face a financial crisis, it doesn't take long before they end up on the streets. But here's the real shocker. 2/3 of California's homeless population is completely unsheltered. That means they're sleeping in tents, under bridges, or in cars because there aren't enough shelter beds. Even cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Oakland, which have some of the most expensive real estate in the country, are filled with makeshift tent cities. California's homeless crisis isn't just about poverty. It's also about mental health. Over 50% of homeless individuals in the state struggle with mental illness or substance abuse, yet the state doesn't have enough treatment centers. Many people are stuck in a cycle of homelessness, addiction, and incarceration with no way out. Even the weather plays a role. Unlike New York or Chicago, where winters force people into shelters, California's mild climate means homelessness is more visible year-round. But don't be fooled. Many people die from heat exhaustion in the summer or freezing cold during unexpected cold snaps. Despite billions of dollars being poured into solutions, the crisis keeps getting worse. Without massive investments in affordable housing, job programs, and mental health services, California's homelessness crisis will continue spiraling out of control, turning the Golden State into the homeless state.